Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And we are continuing our Christmas month of presents to ourselves with Santa Claus, the movie. But this is from 1985, directed by GenreVision, who directed Jaws 2. Go listen to our Jaws 2 Fin Flick episode. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But first, some quick calls to action, because we have our favorite call to action. We have a new patron over at patreon.com/GenreVision. This is Zachary. Zachary, thank you for being an amazing, awesome person and becoming a Patreon subscriber. You can go to patreon.com/GenreVision and sign up for just $5 a month. You'll get access to all of our bonus content that we make for all of our GenreVision shows. We do weekly pre-shows there, monthly extended currently consumings, uncut episodes of Fin Flicks, and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Oh my god, there's so much stuff!
But thank you, Zachary, and thank you to anybody who wants to go over there and become a cool patron. If you don't want to do that, another thing that you could do that would sincerely help us out is go review the show on the Apple Podcast Store.
But only if you're sincere about it. If you leave an insincere review, we'll know.
we can suss that out.
Yeah.
Please, the reviews really genuinely help us out. They help us climb in the Apple Podcast rankings, which means more people are just going to get the show to cross their radar. And if you do leave a written review, we promise to feature it here on the show. So Santa Claus, the movie, I feel like this is a movie I was aware of at some point in my life, but just totally forgot. And then we kind of stumbled across it as we were putting movies together for this month and watched the trailer. And Travis was very adamant, like, we got to do this. This is too weird. And I watched the trailer and I agreed. And to be fair, there is some interesting production elements. It's the last movie that was produced by the Salkinds, who most people know were the producers behind the Superman films.
Sure.
Superman 1 through 4 and Supergirl. At one point, this was possibly going to be written and directed by John Carpenter.
Yeah, it had a bunch of big names attached to it. Robert Wise.
Yeah, I mean, it was clearly crafted to be a big budget, broadly reaching, large effects film and large production. And here's the thing. No matter what we end up saying about this movie, I want to make one thing very clear on the outset. If there is anything this movie succeeds at, it is being a piece of Hollywood production, because, wow, there is some really knockout stuff in this movie in that regard.
Sure. I mean, it's estimated that they spent up to $50 million on the production of this.
In 80s dollars.
Yeah, in a movie in 1984, that's fucking huge. And you can see it on screen. And I was really most impressed by just what a production it was. I mean, they really go all out. I think GenreVision as a big director at this point, like, this is probably the biggest he ever got with movies in terms of scale. Like, sure, he did Jaws 2, and that has its share of like action sequences. Like, there's a helicopter that crashes in that movie. Like, they dumped some money on Jaws 2, but I don't think they spent this kind of money. This was this is distributed by TriStar at the time, but the Salkinds put this together because they were the kind of folks that could raise the serious amount of money to dump into a production like this. And boy, oh boy, was I surprised to see how it came together, because I had really never heard of this movie before this year. Evidently, it has a bigger, I wouldn't call it following, but I think people are more aware of it in Europe. John Lithgow was talking about his role in this movie, and he said more people will recognize him from this role when they're from the UK. He thinks, Americans have largely forgotten about the movie, and that seems to check out. Like, I know nobody else who's seen this.
I'm sure our wonderful commenters will let us know. I feel that there is probably I feel like this is probably one of those movies that's kind of lost to a specific generation, that after a certain point, it really didn't hold any water or wasn't getting rediscovered or anything. And I think that's part of the reason why we were so curious about it. And after watching it, I mean, this is one of the most bizarre movies we've done this year.
Yeah.
I want to make it very clear. We've done movies like Mystics in Bali and The Boxer's Omen this year. And Santa Claus, in terms of being a mainstream product is truly weird.
It is weird, and it's baffling as a mainstream product, but it's still a mainstream product. It's not going to be as abrasive, I think, as something like Mystics in Bali, which is not, not designed to, at least, well, I don't know about designed, but it certainly would not read as a mainstream film to viewers today. Whereas this, I think viewers today could look at and go, oh, clearly that was a mainstream film. It has people I recognize in it. It's clear that I can see money on the screen.
In that regard, I would, this is not my shelf pick, but I would almost liken this to another movie we did this year, which is David Lynch's Dune. In the sense that this is trying to be, a big mainstream 4-quadrant product, doing something that they think people will have some familiarity with, but it is unavoidable at the foundation of the story how truly odd this all is.
Yeah, and the whole approach to this was, well, let's tell a Santa Claus story that assumes what children know about Santa Claus, particularly in the United States, assumes that all of the things that children know about Santa Claus is real. What does it mean? Like, is Santa Claus a man? If he is a man, where did he come from? How did he gain the role? Like, was it like Tim Allen who accidentally killed Santa Claus? But yeah, but it was crazy for me to realize the other day that in that Tim Allen movie, we actually see Santa Claus like fall off a roof and break his fucking neck.
And he dies.
Wow,
and he
that's
deflates.
Weird. Yeah,
he dissipates into nothingness.
This is true.
And here's the thing. That ain't even nearly as weird as what goes on in Santa Claus the movie. So,
well, that other movie, like when Santa like dies and deflates, they kind of treat it as sort of a minor thing, like, oh, well, he's gone. And
it's also comical, like they're treating
Yeah.
it comical. Santa Claus the movie, it certainly has its attempts at comedy, but one of the most striking things about it is its unflinching sincerity about what it's trying to do with the Santa Claus myth.
Yeah, and so we get this opening that was a little unexpected. It's this little village somewhere in the Arctic Circle. It almost looks like it could be Finland or something like that. It's clearly far north in Scandinavia. And it's in wintertime. And we see all these people in sort of, just brown villager costumery, furs and things like that, sitting around in huts while there's a snowstorm raging outside. And, one of the village elders is telling a story to all the children, and the children are all sitting around like with dead eyes and slack jaws. And I'm like, what is this? This is really odd. You and I both had that same thought, I think, about the same time. We're like, what's going on here? This was not what I expected. And just when you thought it was going to be like something totally unrecognizable, this dude shows up. And you can clearly tell, like, oh, this is who they intended to be Santa Claus. And it's played by the actor David Huddleston, who you might recognize from Big Lebowski. He plays actual, the Lebowski in the Big
Lebowski.
Yeah.
Here, before that happens, this story that's being told, it does one of these things. And I had a reference point for this, but I didn't write it down. Is they're telling the story about the little people and these magical creatures, and they call them the Vendigum. And it's this weird nonsense. Like, I looked up, I was like, is this like some ancient, Nordic term for, like, this is like the Nephilim, or something from the Bible. And it's like, the only reference point I could find for this word is from this movie. So they're saying, they're like, oh no, these elves are actually these creatures called Vendigum, and they're magical creatures that I don't live, we will find out eventually these are the elves that will be in the North Pole. But this is one of those kind of like Snow White and the Huntsman or I don't know, like Maleficent type approaches where it's like, we're going to approach this fantasy world that you've all taken as a given from typical fairy tale storytelling. But now we're going to explain it all, and we're going to give it terms like Vendigum. This is where the movie kicks off and is going to sit with for like the first, 45 minutes or an hour.
Here's the structure of it. Instead of doing the whole, like, okay, the first 15 to 25 minutes is going to be your first act where all the characters are set up. Instead, they take damn near the first half of the film to tell the Santa Claus origin story to finally get us into the story that takes place in the mid 80s when the film was released. It takes its sweet fucking time doing it too, man, because not only do they have to set up like where Santa comes from, they have to establish this whole like Santa economy, like, okay, who works for him and how does the workshop work? And, is there a religion, and is there an idea that these elves, the Vendicum, follow? Like, it goes way off the deep end in terms of that stuff. And it goes into such a level of detail that I was just, I think, gobsmacked by it. I'm really surprised and very confused. And not because the mythology is confusing in the least. It's all very, very simple. But the fact that they went into that amount of detail in this movie about Santa's origins was just really surprising and often baffling. So in this opening, this dude CLAUS, he delivers toys, these handmade, wood carved toys to all these children in this village. And he is not yet Santa Claus. He is not yet the supernatural being who flies down people's chimneys on Christmas Eve.
No, it's just him and his wife, Anya.
He's just a dude with a wife named Anya, and they're on a carriage on a snowy night. And after they deliver toys to the children, they get caught in a blizzard. And it looks like they die.
This is a Rover Dangerfield moment where, in Rover Dangerfield, Rover is cast into the waters off the Hoover Dam in a bag. And the cinematic language has the bag with this dog in it falling to the depths and fade to black. Our read of that is cinematic, like that's death. That signifies death.
It looks like a very clear delineation in the story.
Yeah, and this is the same thing that happens in Santa Claus the movie, where these CLAUS and Anya are trudging along. They hit this blizzard. They get stuck in the snow, and they fall asleep in the blizzard. And then we fade, and it's like, again, this is death. Death has occurred.
We just saw Santa Claus die, y'all, and his reindeer, right? His reindeer who are pulling the sleigh, they die. They lay down and die.
But then the movie fades back up, and we get this beautiful, beautiful matte painting.
Yeah, Money from Pink Floyd starts playing. Boom, boom, ba-doom.
Well, I mean, there's these great lighting effects
boom.
and these oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on a very simple word. We see these lighting effects, and out of this, there's this super surreal, like it is incredibly surreal image where it's these points of what we soon discover are light, but it's just these strange triangular light shapes coming out of this giant light pyramid that's shooting down from the glowing North Star that has become like a supernova. What in the fuck is going on?
Yeah, it looks like Santa is having a religious experience. It looks like he is approaching death, but instead, out of this sort of gateway of light come all these little elves. And their attitude towards CLAUS and Anya is very strange. Like they all seem to have these very big, like forced smiles, and it's all a bunch of middle-aged men. That's all the elves are, is like middle-aged men in very bright, like primary colors.
No women.
Yeah.
That was just an observation that I had. I was like, wait, there are no women among the elves, are there? And it's like, nope.
It's just it's a total sausage party up at the North Pole, evidently. But they give CLAUS the bad news. And the bad news is, we've been waiting for you. You are the one who we've been waiting for to give us purpose. We are going to Shanghai you now into this labor that you must perform because it is your holy duty. The prophecy is foretold.
Oh, we can't even, you can't spoil that greatness just yet because.
No, but they kind of hint that that's where that's going. Like, we have dreamed of this moment. It has been foretold. We have been waiting for you.
Well, I don't remember. His name's like Spoopy or something, whatever. The lead elf comes out and he's like, oh, yes, we've been waiting for you. And you're like, oh, you're the Vendicum? And he's like, we prefer to be called elves. And they take him away into this magical dimension. And we get to the workshop, and this workshop is an absolutely jaw-dropping, incredible set in Pinewood Studios.
It's fucking enormous. Holy shit!
Looking at past reviews of this, so many reviews called the production design of this tacky, and it's because, like I said to you, it was like This is like if you gave the designer of a McDonald's play place $100 million to make a set. Like, it has this very knowingly childish thing. I think I called it like FAO Schwartz porn.
Yeah, well, the production design in Santa's workshop, everything is built to be sort of big and chunky. Like, everything looks oversized. Like, all the wood appears to be like from trees that are way too big. Everything is carved to be way too large. So it actually makes the elves look really small by comparison. Like, there are some shots that I was wondering, I'm like, is this supposed to be forced perspective to make the elves look small? And it's not. It's just that the sets are built in such a way that everything is supposed to be really big and carved to look like wooden toys. And it's such a strong design choice. And it's ugly, like consciously kind of ugly. And the same goes for the elf costumes. You know, they're sort of like big buttons and big patterns, big ugly prints and, you know, bright primary colors. It's a little hard to look at. And the movie revels in it so much that you're like, wow, it's kind of really in love with these ugly choices it's making. But I at the same time, none of the choices were that baffling in the design of the film that I thought, why the hell would they do that? Like, I understood the intention every time.
And in a way, it feels like a $50 million expansion of what you expect from a mall Santa setup.
Sure.
Like, it's got a similar aesthetic, but it's like, but what if a mall Santa had $100 million to do this?
Well, and I was reminded, like, this is a Salkind movie, and they're going to take the same sort of approach that they did with Superman. Like, all the Krypton stuff with Superman, I was instantly transported back there with a lot of the choices they made and like how to complete these as effect sequences.
Agree. So Santa gets here and they're told, like, yes, you know, you are going to deliver presents to children, you know, across because you were doing that anyways when you were alive. Now, granted, they don't say this is all our read of the movie. We believe he has died, and we will get more evidence for this in a bit. Mm-hmm. And the elves are like, okay, yep, like, here it is. These reindeer, we're going to feed them some magical golden flakes that will allow them to fly, and you'll be able to fly across the world. And they you know have to introduce every single reindeer. Dudley Moore is introduced as the elf Patch, and he's it seems like he's the reindeer stable keeper and
something like that.
But he's like this elf that has a lot of like big ideas, and we'll get to that in a bit, because what's more important is when we get the big info dump. And it is when we're like, all right, so they've continually say it's like, we've been waiting for you to show up. You're going to be this person who is going to become, you know, what we will know to be Santa Claus. So they take him to this giant toy room, which is this awesome, again, it's this awesome matte painting that's also this big set and all this stuff. It's gorgeous. And then the elves part like the Red Sea. And out from amongst them comes a man with a gigantic beard so long that there is an elf on either side of him carrying his massive beard. And this man, who is credited as Ancient Elf, is played by none other than the legendary luminary Burgess Meredith.
They don't name the character in the film except in the credits, you know, as Ancient
No,
Elf.
well, because we were like, okay, is he the previous Santa or something? Like, what is it? But he walks up, and if you're going to make a movie deliver absolute ridiculous bullshit to the audience directly into the camera, you get Burgess Meredith to do it. Because this man stares down the barrel of that camera and tells us things like, you're going to live forever.
The craziest thing he says is, let me see. The prophecy has come to pass. Obviously, he says that. Quite literally.
He says the prophecy's come to pass. He calls him the chosen one, and then when it's like, hey, you're going to deliver presents to all the children, and Santa asks him, how can I possibly do that in a single night?
Mm-hmm. And the Burgess of Meredith himself says, the night of the world is a passage of endless night for you. Yo, what? What?
This is so whacked. It sounds like he's reading it off of the One Ring. Like,
yeah, right?
It's so high fantasy BS.
And weirdly dark. Like, it seems very ominous and evil. Like, I really could not shake how creepy all this shit was, because Santa and his wife, Anya, express a lot of doubt about how this is supposed to work. Like, Santa says like, well, how does this work? And the elves tell him, you live forever now, like us. That's creepy.
I mean, you're putting
I'm putting a little bit of English on it. Yeah, I'm putting a spin on it.
Yeah,
but still, like, it's there in the text.
Yes. As written, it is creepy. It is weird. And it's kind of the pinnacle of the movie for me in terms of it committing to this wackiness. Because after this, it's like, okay, I guess this was our first act. No. The first act continues. And it is now going to be a montage of the centuries of Santa establishing himself as Santa Claus. So we get these really cool, like formalist kind of Sam Raimi montage sequences where we see an hourglass with sand going down and the sand's filling up and it'll say, like 16th century, 17th century, whatever. And
yeah, it's like a cross between a Sam Raimi montage and the fucking sequence in Vertigo where it's the nightmare in Vertigo.
It's the nightmare in Vertigo. So we see this and we see a number of things happening. Like, okay, like children realize that they have to write to Santa, or they decide that they want to write to him. So now these letters turn into cartoons that just fly into the air and fly all the way to the North Pole and come down a chimney, and they have to read them and everything. Then there's a point in this montage which is so fucked where we see a kid abusing a cat.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Where he's grabbing this cat and it's yowling and he's just grabbing it by the nape and like, meh. And I assume his sister is saying like, stop it, stop hurting that kitty. And so then the little girl has to write. She's not writing for anything specific. She's like, dear Santa, I know that he, hurts the kitty sometimes and, please, help and all this. It's like, what?
Dear Santa, please know that my brother stands accused of animal abuse.
Yes.
Please rake him over the coals this year.
So Anya reads this letter and is like, I don't think he should get a present. And Santa Claus is like, oh, by the way, Burgess Meredith dubs him Santa Claus.
Yeah.
He says like, you will now be called Santa Claus. Like it's a very like Han Solo name moment.
Yeah. It's so strange. That Burgess Meredith scene is one that you truly have to see to believe.
You have. It's so
funny.
It is so. It is like that has to be on YouTube. Like just that moment. Like just watch that.
I really do hope that there are people out there who think that scene is as buck wild as we do. But like, this movie takes so much time to establish things like, okay, at first Santa gives presents to everybody, but then there's one little girl who says, my brother abused a cat, and he did. And Santa's like, well, but I have to give toys to all the children. And his wife's like, hey, Chief, I'm sorry, but that doesn't fly. We got to moralize here. And there's that thing. So it establishes like bits of lore along the way. It even establishes that Santa has a bit of an affinity for milk and cookies, so they put him on a diet.
In that moment where she says like, you know what, that kid shouldn't get a present. He's like, but everyone should get presents. She's like, we should change it. He tells Spoople or whatever the main elf is.
Spork.
I'm not trying to. There's names like Doofer and stuff like in this movie.
Yeah. Well, there's again on a tangent here, but there's this bizarre moment where you figure out that the elves work in like constant shifts, and so they're fucking hot swapping beds.
Yeah, you see the names.
Yeah, when they get out of bed, there's like a plaque on the side of the bed that they spin, and another elf's name appears on it. It's like, okay, some other elf with a different crazy name is about to climb in the same bed that did. It's like they work on a submarine. It's fucking nuts.
The endless labor that this is all about. So Santa's like, all right, you know what? Dumpho, make up a list. And, of kids who are naughty and nice and be good. I'm going to be checking it twice. And it's
Wink.
like, kill me. Like, but this movie, I mentioned the Han Solo thing. It has that same kind of mindset where it's like, we have to knock every single thing off of the list here that we think is a primary part of this character's mythology. And so it does. So like, even to the point where Santa has to be read "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" when it's first published. And before we started, I mean, maybe, I don't know, we were like 15 minutes in the movie when we realized like, oh my God, they're going to explain everything. We jokingly said like, oh man, I hope they explain why his belly shakes like a bowl full of jelly. And then they do that.
Yeah.
They mention while they're reading the poem, like, oh, his belly shook like a bowl full of jelly. Santa gets self-conscious and Anya puts him on a diet.
Let it be known that all of this takes for fucking ever. Forever. There's this big sequence after Santa first gets to the North Pole and he sees like the production line going, and it's just the elves dancing and like this big musical sequence, and it lasts forever.
I mean, there's a whole. I just remember this. There's the weird sequence where all the elves gather and stare up into the wooden sphincter of this building.
Yeah, there's like a weird telescope thing, and it's like, what are they doing?
Well, this weird, like the weird North Star that teleported them here, moves over this opening, and then it just starts snowing inside, and they all are like, "Yeah, season's greetings," and it's like, what? This is their religion? Like, what is going on?
It is quite strange. And it was like torturous at this point, in the movie where like it just keeps going and it just keeps going. It doesn't really seem to be going anywhere other than just explaining more and more Santa stuff. And I thought, please grant me a reprieve. Like, Santa, please bring me an edible so that I can tolerate this movie.
Well, all of this is not the story of the movie. That is what we need to make really clear. All of this that we're talking about sounds buck wild and fun, but actually watching it, much like last week's movie, Jaws the Revenge, it's not actually that fun. It's befuddling and bewildering, but a story isn't happening.
Well, I beg to differ. This is a story. It's just not a good one. What it isn't.
It's not a story.
Plot.
It's
no.
It's a Wikipedia article on Santa.
It's like a Shaggy Dog story. It doesn't really appear to be going anywhere. Is it a succession of events? Absolutely. It is. Is it being told in a narrative format? Yes, absolutely. It is a story, but it's not a plot.
But there's no conflict at all for like the first 40 minutes.
There's conflict that's internal to scenes like, oh no, Santa's getting a little fat. Oh no, children are abusing cats.
But there is not like, we don't really get what the crux of the actual conflict of the overall narrative is going to be until about like halfway through, when Dudley Moore's character Patch, who I will say this, performance wise, I don't think there's any terrible acting going on in the main players. I think everybody's doing a pretty good job.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, they've been given this extremely silly script to act out, and they're all just kind of doing it pretty well. Yeah.
I mean, Dudley Moore is probably saddled with the worst things because he has all these terrible elf puns that he has to say where he's like, oh, I'm elf conscious. And
he doesn't have any elf control.
Yeah. We eventually find out that Patch, his motivation, he's like, I want to increase production. We need to be more modern. We need to go into the wave of the future. I want to design a production line that will help speed things up. And Santa basically makes a contest where he's like, all right, this guy wants to do it the old fashioned way, and Patch wants to do it this new way. Whoever does the best job will win, and they'll become my official assistant. They'll get my shiny new apron. I mean, we didn't even talk about, like, we have to go through a whole sequence of getting Santa's suit and finding out that green is not his color. Like, this movie does all of this.
Well, there's like a scene where Santa is so tired that he ends up dipping his beard in his soup because he's falling asleep at the dinner table, which is what makes them think like, oh, Santa needs an assistant. And then it's like, okay, well, the assistant thing has to be a contest between, I don't know, Dweezil and what's his
Patch.
The Patch. Thank you. So yeah, one of them tries to make things the old fashioned way, and then Patch tries to do this big automated assembly line where machines are assembling toys. And it seems, at first like, okay, well, these look similar enough to the classic Santa made wooden toys that this would be passable. And so Patch wins the position because the assembly line's able to make more. And then there is this transition of the film. We actually transition away from the Santa's Workshop setting for the first time in any significant way. And we meet two children. There is this young street urchin boy. I forget what his name is.
Joe.
And then there's Cornelia, who is a young rich girl.
who is often referred to in the film as corny, which I can't believe that.
Like you do.
It is established in this world, Santa is a real being. He's a given. Like, people in the world believe wholeheartedly in him. But a character like Joe doesn't believe in Santa, because when we are introduced to him, he sees a street Santa, ringing the bell, Merry Christmas, trying to get donations, only to reveal that whoever this street Santa is actually stealing the donations and is also hiding booze in the donation box, which he's drinking. And Joe reveals that, like, hey, I never believed in Santa. I didn't ever think he was real. All I've seen is, just a bunch of drunk hobos basically pretending to be Santa.
He basically saw it's an Always Sunny in Philadelphia character.
Yes. And meanwhile, Cornelia, she is always just kind of seen with her very strict nanny, but she wholeheartedly believes in Santa. And it's here that we start to develop what the actual story of the movie is going to be.
Mm-hmm. So we get to Christmas again for Joe, and he's stuck out in the cold. He's starving. We get this really, really strong blast of product placement when he goes and looks through the window of a McDonald's.
He doesn't just look through the window of a McDonald's, Travis. He looks through a window through the Golden Arch logo of the McDonald's.
They must have gotten a hefty chunk of change from McDonald's to shoot them in this light.
I hope so. I get that money, because this is like an extended ad for where he's looking in, and McDonald's is the happiest place on earth, where these families are just laughing at each other and stuffing their face with chicken McNuggets. And it is it's so funny.
It brought me directly back to the Day the Earth Stood Still remake, where they have that big scene set at McDonald's. Yeah.
We both made that reference. Yeah. So we're like, wow, that's pretty blatant product placement. But then it doubles down on it, like in the next scene.
Yeah. Yeah. Cornelia sees him starving outside because he's been kicked out of the McDonald's. And she brings him this like big plate of like Christmas roast and all these sort of classic sort of homemade things. And what else? A big frosty can of Coca-Cola with the label always turned perfectly toward the camera.
Gotta be.
And you get a great close-up of Joe cracking that thing open and taking a big slug of that Coca-Cola. And then the big hearty belch.
Oh, man.
That was very disgusting what I just did, but that's also how I felt when the movie did this. I was like, oh, man.
Well, so Santa eventually, like, realizing that Joe does not believe in Christmas and is coming, like, he's doing his nightly rounds, and he sees Joe being all homeless and shit, decides to come down and visit him, and uses his teleportation powers to be like, hey, Joe, I'm Santa. And, reveals to him, like, yes, I am the real Santa Claus, and here's how everything goes. You want to fly my reindeer? And they fly around. And I'll say, like, there's some pretty impressive shots, like all the stuff of the sleigh riding around and flying around New York City, all those compositing shots.
As an effects movie, this is pretty fucking good, right?
It's very good.
Yeah, the compositing is good. Anything that's hand-drawn as far as animation looks great. The rear projection is really good. The miniatures are really good.
One of the things I really love about this are the fake reindeer that they use in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Which are just unbearably fake, but I love them.
Yeah, but they are puppets that are supposed to look sort of cuddly. I mean, they're definitely toyetic in a lot of ways, but they emote well. Like they're supposed to be characters that emote. Like you're supposed to be able to understand like when they're afraid, because that's a plot point. One of his reindeer is afraid of heights, and
Donner continually is always making scared. He can't do the super pooper looper or whatever it's called.
Super duper looper.
Yes.
Anyway, this joyride sequence between Joe and Santa lasts, I don't know, 12 years approximately. It's interminable. You and I were discussing, like, this would be a good candidate for an MST3K movie, because you could cut 25 minutes of running time out of this movie easy and lose nothing.
Yeah.
Oof. So after this joyride ends, Joe and Cornelia both have a Merry Christmas. They get gifts, and Santa takes Joe into Cornelia's house to put presents by the tree, and Cornelia comes in and sees, and it's all very saccharine, just so tooth-achingly, cavity-inducing sweet. We fast forward a year. It isn't until this point in the movie, which is an hour in, that we meet the villain of the film and an actual plot kicks in.
Yes. Before that, we should say, I do want to talk about the villain. I know I want to talk about the villain. But before that, Patch, who created this automated system to make the toys, it breaks down.
Oh, right. All the toys fall apart. Yeah.
Yes, because when Santa gives him the apron, it's like, yeah, you're the assistant. But then all of a sudden, the machine breaks down and everything's falling apart. And so he's got to take the assistant's apron away from Patch and give it to Milmo. Patch is very despondent, and he's like, you know what? I have to leave. I have to leave the North Pole and figure out a way to become better at making toys so I can, shine in Santa's eyes again and become his assistant.
He walks out into the magical Arctic wilderness with a fucking bindle over his shoulder like, oh, I guess I'm never coming back. I've been banished. I'll go and die in the real world.
Yeah, well, again, the more cinematically, when he leaves, he looks back at the fortress of Santa and the camera just fades to black. The lights fade to black on him. It's like he's going to die. He's more death. Anyways, Patch also has magical teleporting powers. He teleports to New York City, and it is here that we begin to meet our villain. And our villain is played by John Lithgow. It is a crime that this entire movie is not just his performance, because the introductory scene with him lights a fire under this movie's ass.
So you see him in some sort of like Senate hearing. He's being grilled over some sort of controversy over his toy company. And he's this cigar chomping executive with these huge fake teeth. I mean, fake teeth bigger than his fucking head. It's crazy.
It's so good.
There are attorneys up there presenting evidence like, yeah, but your toys are, they're all trash. They're all garbage and they hurt children.
They're dangerous.
And, yeah. Lithgow's like, no way. And they tear the head off a teddy bear and all this sawdust and all these nails come out of it. It's like, oh, okay. The movie got good.
But before that, they also show that one is highly flammable. And they light it on fire.
It just goes woof.
It's so funny. And he's just, straight up like denying this all. And he is just this absolute like Mr. Moneybags level cartoon capitalist Republican demon.
Yeah, he gets so raked over the coals during this hearing or whatever it is. He comes out of there and declares they're all commies. So this is now like the movie is actually moving and doing things. He goes back to his office at the company is called BZ.
Yep, BZ Toys, and he is the titular BZ.
Yes. So he's in his really incredible office set. And who should appear to him but the elf,
Patch.
Dudley Moore,
Yes.
Patch. Sorry, these elf names are never gonna click with me.
Patch sees one of his he sees a standee in a toy store, and he sees a bunch of people taking his toys off the shelves, thinking that they must sell really well, so he must make really good toys. So he decides to visit BZ to get his help to become a better toy producer. And he visits him. He's like, oh yeah, I'm an elf and I come from the North Pole and all this, and we can join forces and we can make better toys and I can show Santa that I'm a good elf. And this of course gives BZ the idea like, oh, like you have all of these magical abilities to make toys. First of all, you'll work free. Like it's free labor, which he loves. He's able to fire all of his workers and just have Patch be the only person working.
Yeah, he knows that he doesn't have to pay Patch anything because Patch is new to this world and doesn't understand that. Patch says, well, we don't, Santa doesn't charge for toys. Santa gives all of his toys away for free. And John Lithgow goes, free? I'm not exaggerating. The performance and the line delivery in this stuff is so arch and huge and exaggerated, and it's hilarious.
It's great.
Part of me thinks like he could not have done this throughout the entire movie because it would have gotten grating. And instead, the reason it's so great is because he's only in 40 minutes of an hour and 48-minute movie and performing this strongly. The reaction shot when fucking BZ realizes that Santa is a communist. The horror on his face is so fucking good.
Well, there's so many moments. I actually think he's doing even better than that because he's not always being that big. There's little tiny moments like when Patch says like, oh, I don't know what money is. And he looks down at him and he just smiles a little bit and chomps a cigar and is like, let's keep it that way.
He's never not smoking a cigar in the movie, by the way.
I mean, Lithgow fucking kills this movie. He is so good. He very nearly saves it. He doesn't, but he very nearly does.
It's not a good movie, and I feel like we're kind of rounding the bend on this. There's still some plot stuff to get through, but like as far as assessments go, like I wouldn't recommend watching this movie because the movie's good. I would recommend you see this movie if you enjoy John Lithgow, because John Lithgow is trampling this movie under his huge feet. It's just so fun to watch him chew the scenery like he does in this flick. It is incredible. I mean, it's probably one of my favorite performances of his now.
I don't have a Lithgow performance I dislike at this point in my life, and I hope to keep it that way.
Yeah.
But this is assuredly one of the most enjoyable, because he gets to just play a cartoon. There's no limit to the choices he gets to make as this particular character, because this character is never given a single sympathetic edge to him. He is pure villain.
Well, and I love, this change, like the first hour of the movie is so achingly saccharine that it's pretty disgusting. And then the last 40 minutes of the film are this really strong anti-capitalist satire.
Yeah, because what it ends up being is that Patch is going to imbue these lollipops with the golden flakes that allow the reindeer to fly, and they're going to sell them for free.
Right.
And for free?
Yeah, and Lithgow, like a fucking coke dealer, is like, well, we'll give these first lollipops to these kids for free, and then they'll be hooked, and then they'll keep wanting to come back and pay us. And so, of course, the lollipops that induce flight in children, they're a huge hit on the first Christmas that they do them, but they're not able to make enough of them. And so Lithgow's like, okay, here's what we'll do. You're going to take your magic fairy meth that you put in reindeer to make them fly, and instead we're going to make them into candy canes, and you're going to put them out not next Christmas. You're going to start putting them out in 3 months on March 25th. We'll call it Christmas 2, the sequel.
It's nuts.
And then there's a Time magazine cover with that on it later. It is so funny. It's so fucking good.
It's wild. It's the best stuff in the movie. There's so many like when John Lithgow is told that the candy canes are explosive, and Jeffrey Kramer, who plays Hendrix in Jaws, is like his weasel assistant that comes and tells him this. Joe overhears this, and they capture Joe and tie him up in the basement to like a pipe and gag him, and he's like crying and sweating. It is so twisted. It's like, this is in Santa Claus, the movie.
Yeah, the first hour of which was insanely sweet and just so sincere and nice all the time, while also being just like really strange and full of some odd bits of horror. And
it's unaware of how weird it is in that first half.
Yeah, it doesn't really have a particularly solid grasp of tone. It's all over the place once it starts injecting these like really big satirical elements. And it's just such a strange choice for them to go like really big anti-capitalist sentiment in this last 40 minutes after they've done that huge McDonald's and Coca-Cola product placement.
Well, sure. I mean, that's the nature of the biz with this stuff, but eventually, I mean, the problem is that at this point, even though the movie's trying to have a forward-moving plot and a kind of understandable conflict, it doesn't work because it hasn't earned that throughout the rest of the movie. I mean, again, it's enjoyable, everything with Lithgow and how it falls into the plot, but by the end, it's like Patch has created his own kind of mechanical sled that he's going to use to deliver these candy canes. The candy canes are going to explode, so Santa Claus has to catch up with Patch to help him. And,
this all this kind of like plot resolution, there are some fun things about it, but really, I'm just here to watch all the rest of the scenes of John Lithgow doing what he does. Like, there's a scene where we figure out that he's actually Cornelia's step uncle, I believe. Mm-hmm. And there is a scene where they reveal that, where she walks into his office and Schwark does this incredible snap zoom on Lithgow's face as he turns around in his chair and he's got the big stogie hanging out of his mouth. It's just such a perfect snap zoom to make him look like a perfect villain. It's just, so fucking good.
And to punctuate it, he does an evil laugh, like a supervillain laugh with that snap zoom.
I mean, Lex Luthor ass motherfucking laugh.
Walking all over Lex Luthor. It's even better. Like, it's better. It's better. I'm saying it. Like, it's better than any Lex Luthor I've seen on film.
It's so awesome because he gets quite his comeuppance in the end. And this is actually before the big climax of the movie. Like, we figure out like what this character's demise is going to be. And so what he does in his true, like, money grubbing, ever hungry for more capitalist fashion is he takes some of these like fairy crack candy canes and jams them in his mouth as the cops are chasing after him. He walks out his office window and onto a ledge, jams a couple of the candy canes in his mouth, and floats away.
Yes, the cops are coming after him because they've found out that these candy canes are going to be explosive and dangerous, and they're coming to arrest him. And my God, the faces that John Lithgow makes in this sequence are just, they should be put in a goddamn museum. Like, he looks at the glowing, radiant red candy canes and he gets this smile on his face, and he starts stuffing his mouth, and he's just, and he's hanging out this window as the cops come in. They're like, no, don't jump. And then he goes to jump, and he's kind of hovering at first, but then he just fucking floats into the atmosphere. And he turns into Ronnie Cox's puppet at the end of RoboCop.
It's awesome. It's so awesome.
And we were content. We were content to have that be the end of his character because it's amazing. But then after everything gets resolved and everything's fine and whatever happens with Santa Claus, who gives a fuck? Because the final shot of this movie, Santa Claus the movie, is John Lithgow spiraling upwards into space, screaming for help. And that's Santa Claus the movie.
Yeah, roll credits.
And then some sappy Christmas song that they were hoping would be a hit single starts playing. I want to reiterate, because I think we had the same kind of feeling with Jaws the Revenge, where talking about this movie is an utter joy, but actually watching it is mostly a bore.
Yeah, it's really that last 40 minutes where shit really pops off.
But even then, I mean, throughout the 40 minutes, we both kept saying, like, please end, please stop. We just want this over. Oh my gosh, there's still 25 minutes left.
I was begging for mercy.
So it's not like the last 40 minutes is like some super great turnaround that saves everything. It's got so much. This is one of those movies where there's so much flavor in it that is fascinating and weird and exciting and funny. But the actual heartbeat of the movie is kind of a flat line.
Agreed. Yeah. The only thing that is worth recommending about this movie is, well, there are two things really. I would say the production design is so strange that it kind of has to be seen to be believed. And then there's obviously the Burgess Meredith scene. And then everything that John Lithgow does in the film is so incredibly watchable and so good. I wish watching the entire film was worth that stuff. I think for most viewers it won't be. I think for us it was. Like, I'm really glad I watched the movie knowing what I know now about John Lithgow's insane performance. And I really could not stop thinking about that ending. Like, it deciding to go out on the shot of Lithgow's character spiraling upward into the atmosphere to his doom. Like, executive producer Dick Wolf.
Right. It's bold. I give Santa Claus the movie this. It is bold in all of the decisions it makes. That counts for something. And I am glad that we watched it, but I could never see myself sitting through the whole movie ever again.
Same.
So I do think we can head over to the shelf where we can pick some movies that might act as a good pairing, or in this case, maybe a good substitute for our main topic. And we want to encourage you, loyal listener, to go to GenreVision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf pick, and we will feature it on next week's episode. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Santa Claus, the movie?
This would be Ridley Scott's Legend. It again, it is a high fantasy that so sincerely believes in what it's doing. But the theatrical cut of the movie recognized that there may be an issue because the villain, played by Tim Curry, who plays the character Darkness, who's basically the big giant devil with one of the best demonic makeups ever on screen.
One of the best entrances ever.
Yeah, but the entrance is a point of contention because it's different depending on which cut you watch.
Well, we're talking, I mean, go. We did an episode on Legend.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the director's cut.
Yeah, the director's cut is better because it holds off on revealing this character until I think after or just about the halfway point where you get an incredible reveal to see how this character actually looks in a scene. It's awesome. The theatrical cut shows him off way earlier in a scene that's like really strangely lit by blacklight.
Yeah.
It is a similar movie in that it feels very stage bound. It's like, oh wow, so much of this was shot on sound stages with a very fantastical look to it, like big scope anamorphic lenses. Like it's just a similar kind of look and feel for a lot of this stuff. Like it just so achingly believes in what it's doing as a fantasy, but it's a much better movie than Santa Claus the movie.
Couldn't agree more. Go watch Legend and go listen to our Legend episode. Well, I'm going to do something. I don't know if I've done this before. I think you've done this before. I'm going to pick a movie off the shelf that I actually haven't seen. So I could be totally off base, and feel free to tell me if I am, commenters. I'm picking Barry Levinson's Toys because I feel like from what I know about that movie, I've never seen it, is it has a similar kind of very knowingly tacky, if you want to call it that, production design, as a lot of it takes place inside of this toy factory, with this kind of crazy inventor-esque type character played by Robin Williams, who, he's inherited this, I know. And eventually there is the general that wants to take it over and start making war toys and all of this kind of stuff. And it's another one of those movies where I feel like it's very, like, from what I've seen of it in trailers and just pop culture, that there's a very clear vision in place, like there is with Santa Claus the movie. I can't fault it for that. It has a vision, and it does not realize how actually twisted and weird it really is being when it's trying to be nothing but sweet and saccharine and, digestible. Not realizing that it's actually a truly, truly warped concept of a story. Now, again, I've not seen Toys, so if I'm off base with that, feel free to take me to town in the comments. But we were talking about it. I think because I've never seen it, Travis has. I think we might have to do this for the show at some point.
I mean, I haven't seen it in so long that a new watch of it would basically be a first watch for me. So I'm looking forward to it. Barry Levinson, always an interesting choice, making interesting choices even when it's in Wild Wild West. So
sure. So we'll have to see. But now we can head over to the listener shelf picks for last week's episode on Jaws the Revenge. Mr. Milksteak went with Piranha 3 Double D as another awful and disappointing sequel. And one more shelf pick because he was feeling the season, Iron Man 3, since it's also technically a Christmas movie. JT went with another 2 choices as well. Went with the short Treevenge, which we fully support. Great to watch. And also for Michael Caine slumming it against a seemingly hyper-intelligent foe from the animal kingdom, there's The Swarm, which I have not seen, but I've seen one great scene from it, which is the hallucinating the giant bee.
Oh, you've mentioned this to me. I don't think I've watched it. Maybe this is another one to do on the show. We don't know.
Maybe. I don't know. I've heard nothing good about The Swarm, so. But maybe. Who knows? Eric Fuchs had a couple of choices, which is you might have to say this one because I know I'll mispronounce it. It's a food thing. It's baking a chocolate babka or babka?
Babka, yeah.
A babka, the perfect Hanukkah swirled dessert bread loaf. I've never had that before, and it sounds very good. But also, if you had to pick a movie, the only other Caribbean horror movie that comes to mind is Jack Frost 2, Revenge of the Mutant Killer Snowman, which he contends is a better movie than Jaws 4. I've seen the first Jack Frost, never seen the second one, so I can't take you up on that. But thank you, everybody, for shelf picks. Love seeing these every week, and very interested to see which ones we get for Santa Claus the movie. Let's do some currently consuming.
Nom, 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
I read a book recently by author Nathan Ballingrud. It's called North American Lake Monsters. This is recently adapted into a series at Hulu, and it was called Monsterland. You can't really find North American Lake Monsters in print anymore. You can find it in ebook format because it has actually since been retitled Monsterland. So if you wanted to go find this in print at a bookstore, you would look for Monsterland. And I really didn't know what to expect other than it had been pretty well reviewed. And I had actually been recommended it several times before Monsterland was ever a thing at Hulu.
I was going to say, I feel like you've mentioned this book before. Not obviously hadn't read it at that point, but I recognize the title.
Yeah, I was interested in it before, Monsterland was announced. And it was, as soon as Monsterland was announced, I was like, oh, okay, this is actually picking up some traction. I'd better read it. And for whatever reason, I held off on it for a while, but I just finished it a few days ago. And boy, oh boy, is it a good anthology.
Nice.
These are some really good short stories. And they are more adjacent, even though they're horror, they are more adjacent to, I guess, contemporary fantasy in some ways. And in some ways, they almost feel like Haruki Murakami stories that border on Drew's favorite, magical realism, where there are choices made in the narratives that are clearly designed to work more in service of the metaphor than to tell a very clear story about an events from start to finish. Like Stephen King's storytelling methods, for instance, are much more grounded in like, well, these are real things happening to people. Instead, sometimes Ballingrud gets much more into like what things mean metaphorically for characters, and lets that define like how the horror of this kind of stuff works. And there are lots of creatures and monsters. There's a werewolf story. There's a kind of vampire story. There is a sort of revenant story. There is a lake monster in one story, although it's not quite what you might think. But there's a ghost story, a haunting story in this that is unlike something I've ever heard before. It's this character who, instead of being haunted by a person, is actually haunted by a city. And it's a ghost of a city that lives in his body.
Or cool.
I guess doesn't live. It is such a strange idea that it doesn't seem like it would adapt well at all, even though they did adapt that story for Monsterland. I'm thinking like, this is so unadaptable because it's just describing things that don't really make sense as visual images. But it's worded really beautifully.
That's interesting. I've always had a story idea that it's not that specifically. I say always, but I had a story idea that's kind of I think an interesting riff on the idea of haunting and haunted houses. So that actually sounds kind of fascinating.
I think you would like it. It's a very different style of short horror than I think you're used to in written fiction. Mm-hmm. So it felt to me very, very fresh. I liked it a great deal. And it's North American Lake Monsters, or Monsterland, written by Nathan Ballingrud. Highly recommended. Anyway, what's on your plate?
I watched a new release movie. This is called Arch Enemy, from writer-director Adam Egypt Mortimer, who also did Daniel Isn't Real, which I think we did as a currently consuming. If we didn't, please see Daniel Isn't Real. Really good movie.
I think we watched it just before we did our top 15 last year, and I think it was an honorable mention for both of us.
Yeah, I think it might have crept up there. It's stuck in my brain. I really liked that movie.
That's pretty good.
And Arch Enemy is, I think, another really great offering from him. This stars Joey Mangos, or Joe, what is it, like Manganiello? I don't know. I'm gonna mispronounce it.
I think I watched a video of him getting interviewed recently. He says Joe Manganiello.
Manganiello, yes, I watched that too, because he was talking about D&D. So this is a very cool riff on the idea of superheroes. Essentially, the main character, Joe Manganiello, is this homeless person who believes that he comes from another world, a city called Chromium, where he was a superpowered being who protected the city and fought against an evil scientist who somehow got teleported into our reality, and now he doesn't have his powers. And he is discovered by this young man who's trying to get hired by this kind of like social media news site, like kind of BuzzFeedy or Instagrammy or whatever. And so he starts following this guy around who calls himself Max Fist, which is just great. And is trying to get his story and learn more about him. Meanwhile, this reporter, this is playing with very, very specific superhero archetypes. This is Superman and Jimmy Olsen, to the point where, and this might be a deeper cut for some people, that this reporter character gets a signal watch, which is a classic thing from the old Superman comics. If Jimmy Olsen has a little watch that he can push, and Superman will hear it anywhere and he'll come racing to help Jimmy. But the reporter's sister, whose character's name is Indigo, is wrapped up in like a drug dealing or some kind of crime thing. And she's going to go make a deal. The deal goes bad. And she's eventually on the run, and their two worlds are going to collide. If you see Daniel Isn't Real, there's a lot of the same kind of psychedelic, weird imagery, but a lot of it, anytime we see the world of Chromium, it's all done in like drawings, like animation, like very kind of, not animation so much, but kind of just like comic book art. And the movie is going to play with you for a while about like, is he really this or is he some kind of crazy person? And without spoiling anything, this kind of runs the gamut from Superman to the Punisher and is very aware of itself and is commenting on superhero stories and how they have to evolve. I really liked this movie. Granted, it's like scratching so many of my particular itches when it comes to comic book storytelling and mythology and the relevance of these stories and what they mean and how they've changed and warped over the years. Joe Manganiello gives a fantastic performance. Like he has to do, you know, I'm doing the gruff voice thing because he's always getting drunk. Like one of his things is like, oh, you know, my body, you know, can process your alcohol here much better. It's why I can drink so much of it. But I don't think it falls into that kind of like grimy, gritty trap, because when it will go there, but it acknowledges that that's not good. And it's kind of refreshing to see that perspective, because I thought, okay, this is just going to turn into this and it's just going to be this particular power fantasy. But this movie's criticizing that in a really smart way. I really like this movie. It's absolutely one of my favorite movies I've seen this year. Really fun little smaller indie movie that's doing something different with superhero stories. And it's always refreshing to me to see that there's still inventive stuff to be done within that particular storytelling mold. So Arch Enemy, check it out.
Cool.
And now we'll wrap things up with our
comment of the week.
And this one's going to go to Stephen Nesbella, who actually posted a video about Jaws the Revenge. This came out about 2 years ago, where a VFX company actually went back and redid some of the effects during the big shark attack sequence underwater with Michael in Jaws the Revenge. And I got to say, like the actual effects work on making this, you know, fake shark look like a real shark is very impressive. Like it's very good work. But this got Travis and I talking about like, that's not Jaws. Like Jaws has to have an animatronic shark that has some sort of character to it. If you just make a regular looking shark and call it Jaws, I don't feel it's really Jaws.
Agreed. Yeah, Jaws has to have a Bruce. It's got to have a big fake rubber shark in it. And it can't quite look exactly like a real great white. It just has to have character.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, whether, I don't know if that was necessarily intentional, but I just think it's become part of the flavor of the franchise. And it's, you know, I've accepted that I will see another Jaws movie before I die. Like they will do it. And when they do, if it's just going to be like the Meg, for example, and it's just going to be a big CG shark, well, you know, the Meg did have a giant, you know, real fake shark when it was dead. But if that's all that it's going to be in a Jaws movie, it's like hashtag not my Jaws. It's like you said, it's got to have a Bruce. Like I want a big animatronic thing. You can touch it up with CGI, but I don't want it to just look like a normal great white shark. Like that ain't Jaws. We'll see. I really have just come to accept the fact that there will be another Jaws. They have to. Every franchise will get milked. So
One day,
you know, if we can write it, that would be great. But you know, I don't see that happening. But in much better news, we're going to close next week out, which is going to be, it kind of just ended up being our Christmas episode. We were going to take a break, but then Warner Brothers had to decide to drop Wonder Woman 1984 on HBO Max. So we're very much hoping Wonder Woman 1984 will be a Christmas present to ourselves and to you, loyal listener. We are going to cover it. That's going to be our last movie for GenreVision for 2020. So let's hope we can go out on a high note. We hope you'll be back next week as we covered Wonder Woman 1984. As always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Santa Claus.
And I'm the Vendigum.
I'm an ancient elf.
Please watch that Burgess Meredith scene and come back next week.
You're telling me we're doing a podcast next week for free? Right here on GenreVision.